bit about me. We're going to talk about navigating 2024 challenges. And the question is, so what does she know about that? So let me give you a little bit of background about Rebecca MacKinnon. I am originally from a Kansas farm, spent my life growing up south of Topeka. Went to Kansas State University hoping to be a veterinary, and the 1980s diverted that opportunity for me. Made a transition into healthcare, and the girl from the farm couldn't stop thinking about innovation though, and an opportunity came along that I started a company for digital health, and it was local to Kansas City. Over a decade, I was fortunate to grow that company from inception to an acquisition by Cerner in 2003. From that time of working with Cerner, a couple of years with Cerner, I got the entrepreneurial itch again, and ag tech was on the rise in the area. And I had the good fortune of working with an incredible ag tech company that had an acquisition a few years ago. Through that time, I've also spent working with other companies and have had a couple of other exits. And through all of this entrepreneurship that kind of runs through my life, from digital health to animal health, back to digital health, and back to agriculture, all of those changes were marked by about 5 boom bust cycles, where I was fortunate to be able to see the rise, but also had to deal with the fall that came as either a CEO or a senior leader on a team. Today, what we're going to talk about is my favorite Van Halen song. Whenever we're in the kind of economic conditions that, quite frankly, biotech has been in for the last few years, what you're reminded of is there's nothing like entrepreneurship that makes you feel like you're standing on the edge of the world. This is actually Kinsale, Ireland, and I had the fortune of standing there. It's an incredible experience. But also in every company, I've had that same feeling. And the reason is, as again, personal experience. In my first company, I was very idealistic. I knew what I wanted to do in the world. I knew what I wanted to achieve with that company. But over a decade, from 1994 to 2003, it took $4.5 million of capital to try to achieve those dreams. And that was what was considered a capital efficient company at the time. If you would present day those dollars, it's more like 8 to 12 million. So the degree of capital required for that digital health company was significant. And what I learned is the very first 6 months after I had gotten my first investment into the company was the only time in 10 years where I had cash visibility. After I ran out of that first capital, from there on, it was an ongoing challenge of how would I move from needing to get capital back into operations, going back to getting capital. It was a constant challenge to figure out the capital equation. And during the 10 years of that company, we also had 2 boom bust cycles that we had to deal with that were quite significant for the industry. So feeling like you're on the edge was the feeling I had for a decade. Since that company, I have experienced it over and over and over again in my consulting work with helping my high growth companies. And the challenges are always the same. The degree of the dollars shift, but the challenges are always the same. Now, for as tough as I think I was coming out of my first company, I stepped into some biotech. And you all work in a whole different world. The ledge is completely different. And it's at times it feels isolating because there's only certain kinds of investors in biotech. They're very unique. So as a SaaS digital health company, lots of investors out there that somebody can talk to. As a biotech, it's very boutique type of investor environment. And I consider your grants also investors. So they're very unique and require that you're operating on a whole different ledge in your cash management process. For the last 3 years, from 2021 to present, biotech has gone through a major contraction in the capital world. I know you all feel that. You've probably been living it. But it's always good to step back and look at what the rest of the world is seeing from biotech and knowing how you compare and what the rest of the world is feeling. Some of this data comes from my work with Springboard Enterprises. Springboard offers 4 different tech hubs that it supports female leaders. And in those tech hubs, life sciences is one of its largest. So we, at different times when I'm helping the life science leaders in that particular hub, I try to keep up on the data so we can normalize what the leadership is feeling in these companies. 2022 and 2023 were full force contraction years. 23 lesser than 22. But the capital really started to dry up in 2022. For 2024, there are signs of green shoots, some really hopeful news that's coming from the data. But it's still going to be a challenging year, and managing your cash, managing how far your cash will get you will be a continued challenge for the industry. For 2024, from a strategist standpoint, there are 4 high priorities that you have to keep in mind at all times. What's the strength of your the capital markets in general, and what's the strength of your capital that's supporting your business? Retaining talent, how are you going to keep the talent you have? And if you have some talent gaps, how are you going to get a hold of that talent? Regulatory approval processes. We saw from 2020 through 2023, our regulatory approval processes have changed, and they're getting a lot more rigorous to try to make your way through. And then the access to your market, and how are you going to find those right relationships that allow you to take the first step. I'm going to take a pause and share how on the capital side of the equation, when you're talking to capital, how are they viewing your deal? So you view your deal for the innovation you're bringing to the market and what you're going to do to change the current world. But how the capitalist views your company is by where you're at in your path. So this particular very hairy graph is 2 very important lines. One is a digital health path, so the kinds of companies that I typically work with, and then the biotech path. The trough of these 2 lines is how much cumulative capital you're having to use to get where you want to go. And when I say biotech stands on a whole different cliff, the cumulative capital necessary to build a successful biotech is very different from that of, say, a digital health company. For a digital health company, you're talking about 5 to 10 years and probably consuming somewhere in today's dollars between 8 to 15 million in capital. For a successful biotech, you're talking about a period of 10 to 17 years, 17 being not a large outlier. That's more the norm than not. And towards that end of the spectrum. And in the capital path, most are consuming between 25 to 35 million dollars to get there in today's dollar terms. So when you look at the path, there are key steps in the company's progress that indicate where you're at in your path. And for the capitalist, it tells you how efficient are you being with your capital? How much more are you going to require, likely among your peer group, in order to be successful? And how do they determine if they're the right fit for you at that moment in time? So if you look at these different steps, again, the first, the lesser trough being digital health, you have an idea, you do some feasibility and some early tech design work. you go to an attorney and you start figuring out if there's something that's patentable, trademark, all of those questions. And then you start doing some early release with first adopters to your tech. You refine, you price it, you do another release, you refine, you price it, and then all of a sudden you're in the market. Okay, with whatever technology you're trying to do. For the biotech, the regulatory path makes that trough ever more deep. It's a more difficult approval process to even being able to start a go-to-market path. So based upon where you're at in your path, you're going to match up with capital players. So that's the key of this slide. It's important as you come through 2024 that you're crystal clear on where you personally, or if you're a consultant like me, where is your company that you're trying to help actually in this capital path? And that tells you a lot about what you're going to have to do to try to bring money to the venture. So the green shoots of hope in 2023, coming out of 2023, there were renewed interest in IPOs. There was a lot of de-risking of capital. And what that meant was they didn't get out of biotech, but they asked for clarity in the biotech's strategic path. Where prior to 2022, almost every investor wanted to hear how the technology could broaden and become a platform. Today, they don't want to hear the word platform. They want to hear, I am going to solve this particular problem. They want you to take, even if there's a platform opportunity into it, they want you to be crystal clear on how could you get your first approval to go to market and get this technology in the market. So that de-risking cycle has been a lot of what companies have been asked to clean up in their capital presentations. Regulatory and legal environment, everyone knows it's gotten tougher. It's anticipated it's going to get tougher too. Geopolitical tensions are changing where things can happen in the world. And so that's making people rethink their cost structures. But the green shoots of hope is Arch Ventures, one of the better capital players in the later stage venture capital for this space, announced a $3 billion fund that they're going to put together for biotech. So it's an incredible time to be alive on that ledge that you're on. The questions then is tell us by deal stage where the money's flowing. Well, in 2022 and 2023, most capital contracted to keeping their deals alive. Okay, there was lesser number of early stage first investments, seed or Series A's done. There was a lot of money that concentrated around B's and C's, meaning capital players were syndicating, working together, making sure their current investments stayed alive and that they gave them enough runway to make it through this period of time. Ag tech was the big winner though. The greatest seed and A dollars went into the ag tech sector. So it's a great time if you have a platform kind of technology in your biotech that can be applied to agriculture, animal or plant health. It's a great time to be there. Also in the digital space, rather than digital health, digital ag, it's a great time to be there. There's a lot of active interest in that. So if you're working on grants, this is lesser for you because grants have their own different cycle and they're very different. But if you're having to do a grant combo with private investors, institutional investors, that kind of thing, this discussion is very relevant to you because navigating capital is very important to how you're going to keep your opportunity moving forward. First is Kansas City. I hear a lot of comments about Kansas City being a hard place to do business if you're in the early stage. And having had a company that was located in Kansas City, for 10 years and went through the entire path of inception to acquisition. I would agree during the 90s and the early 2000s, Kansas City had a very weak capital basis to it for those kinds of companies. Early stage capital was very difficult to find in Kansas City. Matter of fact, when I looked for my first institutional capital, there were 2 numbers in the city I could call, and that was it. If I couldn't get those 2 people to agree to be a part of my deal, I was looking somewhere else in the world. So Kansas City has really done some incredible work on the ecosystem for capital. And there are a number of deals that that have grown in the city over the last decade that you can directly point to the strength of that ecosystem going to work for young companies. But just having the capital is not enough. The company has a lot of work it has to do for itself in terms of navigating that capital. Somewhere in the last decade, I started seeing something among my consultant clients, but also at Mid-America Angels, where I'm an angel investor. I started seeing a major weakness in companies, and it's not been good for the companies as they try to navigate the different capital ecosystems. And that weakness has been the boards, the strength of the board that you put around you. Because capital was flowing so richly from 2016 to 2020, I think a lot of companies felt like the value of a board really hindered them. And that may be the case in some cases, that the boards weren't keeping pace with how capital could flow. But now that we're in much more difficult times, it becomes clear how important a board can be. And the importance of a board is not just governance. Governance is an important part of a board. But it also has a lot to do with connections and networks and being able to create credibility for your company by having the right people around your company. Boards often lead you into capital networks. Just like whoever's invested in your company has a group of people who also have money that they hang out with, board members tend to have people that they know that they can make connections so that you can continue to take yourself through the capital markets. Local, regional, national. Those are 3 tiers of capital that you have to realize are important for you to find your ways to access. Local, very important. Never bypass your local players. Regional can be helpful if you're sitting in a cluster. So for ag tech, we're in a regional area where ag tech is well supported, it's well understood and well supported. National, sometimes you got to get on a plane and go to the coast when you're ready that you need that bigger money. But you have to have that local and regional connection to get you to national. And then strategic relationships. Biotech, that long period of 17 years that you're traveling, people know there's only a few buyers at the end. There's only a couple of ways to exit those businesses. So having the right strategic relationships developing around you as you go through that capital network is just as important as getting the money. Angel capital. So one of the best strengths we've had over the last decade in this community is the angel capital ecosystem. Lots of capital has flowed into early stage from high net worth individuals. Whenever you're in angel capital though, angel capital is some of the most friendly capital you're going to get. Okay, nice size checks can come into your business with very little due diligence. That's great when your primary focus is the cash, but it's not so great when you know where you're at and that path that you're having to travel, and no one is placing you under the pressure of deal terms and diligence. That's really the value of an angel group. An angel group allows you to take a still easier but a step into having to meet conditions of diligence and deal terms. And whether you know it or not, it's an important step to take because it's what prepares you for if this is your next step. If your next step is you're going to need institutional capital, that first step into the angel groups is a great way to have to stand up here like I'm standing, give a presentation, and then have people pepper you with the questions that come. And when they start peppering, then they start wanting to see it. That's where your diligence starts. Coming out of that meeting, they're going to want to see that you've actually performed the way that you told us on stage you performed. And then terms get written around that. So that whole preparing you for the much more rigorous venture capital world is the importance of your angel environment. So your local is incredibly important because it helps you with cash, but it's also, if it's functioning right, it's incredibly important because it prepares you for the next step. Strategic relationships are the enigma for me in biotech. I have to say, you guys do a great job of managing potential strategic partners. But they're a challenge because basically at some point they're likely to become an acquirer unless they're just fully a supplier to you. If they're fully a supplier to you of some kind of technology or some kind of service, you don't have all of the relationship tension that comes with their relationship if they're going to eventually be one of the people that could potentially acquire you. Managing strategic relationships as you go through your path is probably one of the more challenging aspects that I think a biotech CEO has to learn how to perform and do. And the challenging parts are, it's always about the people. So who in that bigger company has decided you're somebody that they should usher through the business, how much strength they have in their company, what the general morals and mores of the company you're working with are, how well do they manage those relationships with early stages? Will they ever be a source of capital, or are they ever just a source of knowledge and maybe access to the marketplace? So the strategic relationship question that has to fall under your entire path to success is an important element of the CEO's role in your company. Prep for renewed opportunities for 2024. If the green shoots of 2023 are accurate, we are emerging from the depth of all the capital challenges, but that means competition is on, right? Because everybody's coming out of that now feeling very capital starved. Their timelines have been stretched. They haven't gotten as many of their milestones met. They're going to have to pay up. What they saved on before is going to have some infusion of capital to catch them up. So knowing your sources of capital and how strong they are is really important. Your sources of cash, that is. Grants, capital partners, debt financing, revenue-based financing. There's an entire slew of opportunities. The best one of all is if you are far enough in your path that you can commercialize. That gives you a whole new access to cash. That just means you have to get to your market and start charging for what you do. But for those of you who have not reached that commercialization point, then you have a lot of work that's in a lot of competition to try to get at the dollars in 2024. Return you to this ugly format that I popped up earlier. If you notice along all these milestones, regardless of which path you're on, a digital health or a biotech path, all of the milestones come with the kind of capital that basically supports that milestone, okay? So you have your friends, family, your seed, your Series A, your Series B, those different types of capital. Once you get down into this extended path, you'll actually see Series D's, F's. They're much different terms to those. Now, why do I keep bringing you back to this graph? amongst everything else the CEO does for an early stage company, navigating this path is the most important skill that the least understood for early stage CEOs. So this particular graph is important for anybody who knows they're going to rely on outside capital in order to be able to meet their goals. This knowing where you're at and being able to match with the right capital is critical. So take you through an example. Friends and family, they love you. They're going to give you money. They're going to give you just what they can afford to give you to get started. But we know friends and family can't carry us to an exit. They don't have enough capital to do that. Seed money is your first step to where you had to convince somebody who maybe doesn't love you. Okay, they're still going to give you a lot of latitude though, because they like you a lot. By the time you get to Series A, you're having to meet some rigorous financial projections. The ability to project where you're going to be at either top line or expense management is critical to your Series A capital player. Now, your Series A capital player will also most times allow you to have losses, especially if you're down in this trough of the biotech. It's known you're going to have losses. But how well you manage your milestones, how well you get from one point to the other and manage the costs around it is a real measure of whether the next follow-on money comes. And it's more, the challenge of these players is it's not the pitch. So up here we learned it's about doing a great pitch, okay? Getting the yes quickly. But once you get over here, or once you get down in here, it's no longer about the pitch. It's about performance. And people are going to want to see that what you told me actually matches to what your financials tell me and what your production on your product milestones tell me. So Stockdale paradox. I don't know if anybody knows the story of Stockdale, which you want to go read it. It's fascinating. It's a great human history story. But the quote that comes out of that story, you must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever that may be. So where we're at in 2024 is we have to confront ourselves before we can go to the capital markets. As teams, we have to sit down and have really brutal conversations about what we got done and what we didn't get done from 2020 to 2023. And for those of us that maybe let the lack of discipline seep into our business plans, and it was easy to do, right? Think of everything we've traveled through. We were taking out of interacting, we were distanced, we went to our homes to work. There's all kinds of reasons that when we ask ourselves these questions, that we may come up short in our answers. But before we go anywhere and ask for capital, we have to answer it for ourselves. And then we have to come up with a plan. So the plan is, if you aren't where you want to be, how are you going to get there? Or can you get there? Do you have to admit that we just didn't use our capital as efficiently as we needed to? And we're going to have to raise more money to re-perform some of the milestones that we thought we were going to be able to hit with prior capital. Do we have the team members? Do we have the talent necessary to get there? Do we have the supplier and partnerships necessary to get there? And if someone gives us the money, what's our use of proceeds? This is the plan that everyone will tell me, oh, that won't take long to do because we all know it. Well, as a strategy consultant, if you're really doing this well, it's going to take you at least 3 months to get your team on the same place that you're at in your head. It may not take you as a CEO long, but I can guarantee you your team's probably not in the same space. So getting your team on the same Here's the answers to our questions, and these aren't what we want them to be. It's what our own data tells us. And then what are we actually going to be able to do, and what kinds of commitments are we going to make to ourselves? And then finally, the action plan that we're going to put to the street. What are we saying we're going to, how much cash do we need? When do we need it? How are we going to create command over the milestones to use it effectively? What's the dependencies, the things we can't control that seep into the plan? Being open and transparent as a team as we go through this plan. How are we going to sit down and sit eyeball to eyeball and really deal with hard issues? A fearless review of our own performance so that no one else has to do it for us. And then challenge ourselves. How are we going to challenge ourselves through this timeline to get there? So this is a great way of saying leadership matters. You as CEOs of these companies that stand on that precarious edge of the Van Halen song are responsible for whether this is going to work. And in being responsible, the challenges go very deep, and it requires a great deal of both personal introspection, the introspection of your team, and then taking risks and placing it to the marketplace. One of my most favorite books, but it's very raw, so if you don't like bad language, you probably shouldn't read it because it's so raw. But it's The Hard Things About Hard Things. And it is a story of one company, and they're traveling through this very precarious path. They worked in the electronics semiconductor, I think, space of about 15 to 20 years ago. And it was an incredible insight to how you might think things are hard, but they can always get harder if you don't do the right things. And so as I read that book the first time, and I've gone back to it several times, I said to every entrepreneur, if you haven't read that book, if you can stand the language, make your way through it. It's a great way to prepare you for what you're up against as we come out of one of these bust cycles. It's going to get ever harder to get money to recommit to businesses that went into the bust cycle. So you have to be on top of your game. Your game is critical as you come out of it. There's a concept that's introduced in this particular book. And the concept is the difference between a wartime and a peacetime CEO. So a wartime CEO recognizes the strength of their personal leadership, the ability to take blows in the marketplace, the ability to find a way to rally your troops and get them refocused. A wartime CEO is very different than a peacetime CEO. A peacetime CEO is warm, is wonderful, is loved. A wartime CEO often is not. Hard decisions have to be made, and they have to be made quickly. And often that's at the expense of how you feel about people. It's just the realities of where your company's at. So many people say, but I'm this and I'm not that. Well, the capital may require you to be more of a wartime CEO where really hard decisions. And I'm going to tell a tale of two stories, or two cities. One city, the company is down in Florida. The other city, the company was down in Texas. The Texas company had hired in a peacetime CEO, second CEO, replacing the founder into the company pre-COVID. That particular CEO had big company dreams. They had come out of big company. They had worked in big company. And when they came into the company, they had big company dreams. They underestimated how hard it is for early stage companies to get a foothold in the marketplace. Underestimated that when you sent out your first digital campaign as a small company, how much people ignore you, that your brand means nothing. Underestimated that a 40-hour work week was enough for their people. Okay, so the peacetime CEO didn't understand the battle they were up against. They spent an incredible amount of capital that was precious. And when it didn't work, the board was left with, what do we do now? Okay, so that company now coming out of COVID is on its fourth CEO. The board keeps, now it's the revolving door. What CEO is finally going to be able to pull it together, but their capital gets weaker and weaker every time they do it. The wartime CEO down in Florida, going into COVID, recognized the incredible, they had never had rich capital, first of all. They recognized the incredible risk that all the signs coming in around COVID was placing at them. And the CEO made hard choices very quickly, and it was very painful. This particular CEO was a woman. It was very hard to make the choices that she had to make about people that she dearly loved. But they're coming out of COVID having grown their revenues by 2 times. Their people are performing. The company is showing financial performance. All of the things that you need to be able to say coming into the capital markets, she achieved. But it was because she recognized she had to make decisions quickly, that she could not let her capital get thinner and thinner before she made those decisions. But the other aspects of peacetime CEOs are really wonderful. And so as you become the wartime for a while, you may have to remember, you can still be a good person that thinks about what's our competitiveness in the marketplace? What kinds of deal terms can we offer to people? How can we be that generous company that makes us easy to work with? You want to get out of your echo chamber. We may think we're great, but how do we find out what our customers think? How do we find out the people who are paying us, whether they agree, whether we're as good as we think we are? So your priorities around raising money is one of the most important things coming into 2024 that a CEO of these companies that stand on the ledge can do. There are 10 mistakes that kill the deal. So this is my wrap-up slide. 10 things that will kill your capital discussion. First is hubris. If you don't recognize coming out of COVID, the investor is under stress also, and you think your deal should be worth the premium, you're probably not going to be successful. Investors right now have the same problem you do. Capital is harder to get. Most investors don't have pots of money they're sitting on top of and they're trying to deploy. They have to go to somebody else and convince them why they should be able to deploy their money. And it's getting harder and harder because, quite honestly, digital health and biotech for the last 8 years have not performed very well for most investors. So we have to reckon with that as an industry. Those 2 sectors are going to have to reckon with that. We've demanded premiums in our deals, but we didn't perform premium results, okay? If your costs are primarily fixed and not variable, big warning sign to all investors. Lack of milestone clarity with the sharpness that you can define how you could shut off the cash if we don't raise the next money. Oh, are we after?
You're good.
Oh, okay. Financing each milestone. Understanding that staging of where you're at and what capital is actually needed and when it's needed. That crystal clarity helps create a sense of calmness in the soul of the investor. Like, this company knows what they're up against. Overselling platform. Matter of fact, if you can take that out of your speech for a year, come back to it when we're in peacetime again. But right now, most people don't want to hear you're making platform investments. That in the investor's mind is equivalent to inefficiency. You're making platform investments that might be smart for the long term, but right now, we have to get to the milestones and get to commercialization as quickly as we can. Lack of realism for the economic conditions. Okay, most people don't like to look at what's happening in the rest of the world, but our government spending is under attack. We have overspent for 4 years, and that money is going to pull back. So we have to create a realism of where does this go? If even the grants that I have been very secure, and I know I've got the inside track, I've got great support in the grant system, what happens if they have trouble getting renewal on the funds for your grants? Not acknowledging competitors. I can tell you every capitalist is tired of hearing companies coming in and saying, we're completely different, we have no competitors, okay? Lack of respect for the investor's risk. Okay, when I showed you that those two paths, I have another couple of tale of two cities. Overstaging yourself is a primary risk in your investment. If you say you're just one step away from commercialization, but you have 3 hidden steps you're not acknowledging that are costly, you're not helping yourself. If you think the investor can't hear it in your conversation, they will dig deep enough to likely hear it, and that will stop the deal from occurring. Insufficient value in your deal terms, that goes to the hubris. You've got to put deal terms to the table that says, I recognize where we're at. I'm recognizing we have to take a step back to take a step forward. And then getting too cozy, too much insight given away. So those are the big 10 things that stop deals from happening. But there's great support, okay? This isn't a statement of, like I said, Kansas City has grown incredibly since even 2003 when I exited my company. There are great support, and much of that support is now coming around us from the external world. There's people looking into Kansas City and the region saying there's something special happening in the Midwest. These people are tough, is what they're saying. Springboard Enterprises, I think this will be a 3rd year that they're offering a dolphin tank for women-led ventures. If you're a woman-led venture and you aren't stepping up to that stage, you need to, because the next step is to be able to go to the national stage and get some visibility for your company. Pepperdine out in, I think they're in San Diego, does its top fundable companies in this country. If you aren't trying to get on that list, try to get on that list if your next stop is either San Francisco or Boston as a life science company. Investment West is bringing together the regionals. And even if you don't think you're raising money today or in April, you still want to be presenting if they'll give you a spot. Because if you're raising money anytime in 2024, that only happens once a year, and it's bringing together great regional players to support the ecosystem. ACA is the same way. They're in Ohio this year in May. If you aren't going in front of that group, that brings together all of the angel groups throughout the country that are a part of ACA. And I think last year they said they had 200 angel groups that came to watch the pitches. And then very local, Digital Sandbox and UMKC's Venture Studio, all great support if you're trying to move from friends, family, and early seed into your first true venture capital or institutional capital play. And that's it. Can I answer any questions? If you want any resources I used in researching this, Kendra can send this out. Great information if you don't want to believe me and would like to go hear somebody else's perspective. So.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was fantastic. So we do have something in the chat from Bob saying, I see a huge difference between purposes and capabilities of boards of directors and advisory boards. Why do so few organizations in Kansas City leverage these?
I think it's not just Kansas City. I saw it across the country. So about 80% of my work occurs somewhere else. And that is not just a Kansas City phenomenon. Across the country, money flowed so richly into companies at really great valuations. That money also lowered its requirements around what the company had to do in its covenants. Many times there were no board covenant requirements, or they were soft, ball board requirements. Advisories have kind of like, that's a mutual concession. Hey, we don't want to do a real board, but we'll do an advisory. But because there's no governance around an advisory, it's really easy to ignore the advisory board. So my view is the fact that most companies aren't utilizing those two tools is because the capital markets quit making them utilize it. The bar got lowered because of how much capital was flowing in. Now's the time that companies should elect to do it themselves.
Great, thank you, Bob. Does that answer your question fully?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've seen that all throughout the world, in fact, and it's just crazy. But in Kansas City, having the understanding of people who are super experts that are definitely plugged in, and their entire purpose is not just about Rolodexing, opportunities. It's about looking at the strategy. Is it realistic? Is it actually solving what the the people wanting? Are there the right products and services mix? And then is everything flowing right in terms of that? And so you got to have all of that. And to get that, you got to have people that have been there and done that. And I see always, all the time, we don't hire consultants here. We don't do this here. And it's like, really? I mean, those are the people who know the stuff better than anybody. So, yeah.
Well, and like everyone, when I said game on, we're all standing on that ledge. Competitive behavior is going to start, and we're going to see whether we as advisors do our job. Like if you do hire a group of people, or you get an advisory board around you, does it make you function better? That's the proof in the pudding. That's where people will start reinvesting in those kinds of value added moves, if they can see that somebody else is getting ahead because they did it and I'm not making it, and I need to take that step. So.
Okay, thanks.
And I'd like to open it up to anyone else who has questions. We have plenty of time if you have more you want to talk about.
I have one, but I'm waiting for everybody else to say their question because I don't want to hog it. Anybody going once,
I
going
think if you,
twice? On state
Bob's turn.
legislatures, opportunities are always perceived as funding organizations and nothing more ever. They're really inept. Their ability to actually inject value, strategy, connect people, really do things at a high level, with the exception of some really interesting, ones that are working, in Massachusetts, for instance, Texas, California. But we have a challenge that what are these state legislative bodies, missing, and what should they be doing besides handing out money? Any ideas there?
I do have ideas. So we have gone through incredibly raucous political environments. We've all seen it. We don't have to recapture those images in our mind. But what it does say is government has quit functioning in its relationship with people, and people have quit functioning in their relationship with government. The right next step is that we take much of this at state, local and state levels, take the political positioning out. Doesn't matter which party you're for, but we should all be able to agree we want strong communities. And so in that, what creates a strong community, the early stage community is the vibrant. There's cities in this country that are winning big because they have a friendlier environment for their early stage community. Now, that doesn't mean every early stage idea is going to make it. And that's what the one thing that entrepreneurs have to be okay with. I had an idea. If it's not making it, I'm still a creative person. I'm going to have another idea. But the community has to be supported by government to support innovation and to lower the regulatory hurdles as much as possible to be successful. So what could the state of Kansas, for example, do for its communities? Listening sessions. Okay, number one, how do you get back in touch with your vibrant communities that do have the framework to build on, and start listening to what those communities need? And what then, as an exchange, the entrepreneur can't just always say, you need to give me money. We have to recognize there's other kinds of support other than money, because we've spent a lot of money since 2016. And we didn't actually produce economic results for many states. So we have to get down to, so what are we also missing? So what could a company take away from a listening session? Okay, who's out there to build manufacturing? If all biotechs eventually have to have manufacturing, who's got the line to the workforce necessary to support what you're trying to get done? How do you look beyond Johnson County? It's very interesting what's happening in mid-state Kansas and western Kansas. There's some things happening out there, but there's people that live in Johnson County who have never visited those communities, and they don't know how aggressive they are willing to take on opportunities. Supporting capital players. So almost being a part of MAA for going on, I think it's 15 years, something like that. Every 3 years, MAA becomes under attack because of the angel tax credits that the state of Kansas gives investors. But the fact is, angel tax credits are very effective. I mean, yes, some rich person who's willing to put money into an early stage company is getting a tax credit. But in a state where capital runs thin, that is a very small incentive in order to get capital into your business. So I can guarantee you for probably 5-7 years after I exited Cerner, I was asked to give comment in listening sessions for how important that capital was to the success of my business. So we all have an opportunity to sit down, get beyond the viciousness that we've created in the political spectrum, and really sit down and talk about what's going to help us move to being a stronger USA again, and a stronger state of Kansas, and a stronger Johnson County, or a stronger Wyandotte County. And we've got to take much of what we've been conditioned to think is the right way to speak out of our language and just get down to how do we care about the economics of what we're doing.
Good, thanks.
Anything else?
I do have another one in the chat from Mark. Do you feel it is important for a digital health founder to choose between raising angel capital or grants? Or is there a strategy for doing both simultaneously if you're as small as a team of 2?
Grants are very time intensive. I have found that in many ways, though they're non-dilutive, there's a lot of wonderful things about grants. Unless that's your core expertise, grants are very difficult on a small team of 2. Okay. Capital is actually almost easier to raise as a digital health company on a small team of 2. Do I think you can deploy both? Yes, I do. And the question is to what degree you're trying to get the grant. So one of the things I didn't go through is all of the different sources of capital that I used in my first company. Strong friends and family, strong angel, went into angel groups, came back around, and there were grants being offered by the state of Kansas for certain product development initiatives. I went back and applied for those grants after I'd already had angel capital and that kind of thing. Had strategic partner money where they were willing, they saw that we were getting things done, and they were willing to partner on certain products. Non-dilutive, but they did get terms of use of that product over time. Customers, it was amazing, and we're back into a time where we're all needing stuff. I mean, remember the grocery stores that had nothing in them? Okay. Inside a business right now, there's a lot of shelves that have nothing in it. We're all under attack. We're trying to figure out how to respond to that. There are customers that are willing to prepay if you will just do the work. So there are so many forms of capital out there. Unless grant is your competency, it's probably the hardest thing to do right now. Now, for people who have that competency, they already have a name in the grant system. They have sponsors that like them in their principal investigating. It's a great deal, but it's hard to earn that reputation in a very short period of time.
Thank you, Rebecca. And Mark, I'd like to add to that, if you haven't gotten into the grant game as much, feel free to reach out. We do a lot of work with grants. We know a lot of good people who can help provide guidance. So if you want those connections, please feel free to email me. We have another question from Kevin. How much does collaboration between biotechs in our region play in the ability to increase excitement and amount of capital inbound? Or is collaboration less of a factor?
So great question. I think collaboration is always a factor. Okay, so do you remember the Bugs Bunny? The one episode where the sheepdog and Wile E. Coyote are competitors when it's during the daytime hours, and then the clock hits 5 and they go have a drink together. That is always in my mind when people ask, is collaboration important? Okay, during the day, we're all fighting for the same dollars. Okay, if we're out there raising money, we all know there's a limited source of capital. We're out there trying to raise money, or we're in the market. We're trying to get people to support our technology over somebody else's. But at the end of the day, we're all part of an industry. And if we're so competitive that we can't let any other competitors exist and survive, we're not going to be that important. Monopolies are not something people typically support on a broad basis. They're supported by a very few, but they aren't supported on a broad basis. So my view is you got to figure out how to be frenemies the whole way. Okay, I have my friends, I have my enemies, and then I have my frenemies. The people who I can talk with, I can exchange, I'm learning from, I'm supporting their story, they're supporting my story, but we all know the limited dollars that are available and we're competing for them.
And I'd like to add to that. I know this is your discussion, Rebecca, but I agree with the capital. That's where competition lies. I've noticed a lot of grants, you need those letters of support for success. You need that collaboration. So I think it comes down to Mark's question. If you're focusing on angel capital, your strategy is going to be different than grants.
But even at grants, the money's going to be handed out to a few ideas. So yes, you want to support each other, but also you're trying to compete with very limited dollars also.
Kevin says thank you.
Okay.
We are reaching the end of our time. I don't know if you have an extra time for any additional questions.
I can take further questions if we want them.
For those who are on, thank you very much for sitting in on Rebecca's fabulous discussion here, and we look forward to seeing you at future expert insights, hopefully. Keep your eyes on our newsletters and different event postings online. We have a lot of discussions around a lot of what Rebecca said. And she's been a guest speaker at key events like Innovation Festival. She had a lot of great things to say there. And if you're looking for more things like that, feel free to reach out to learn more. But
yeah, and everyone can reach out, colleagues too. We're all out there trying to find consulting opportunities for 2024, but I have a lot of gray hair in these areas. Would love to share.
Yeah, so if you want to be connected with Rebecca, I'm also happy to help with that as well. If there are any other questions, it sounds like she's open to asking, but otherwise, thank you so much for your time.
Rebecca, I was gonna ask,
Silence current.
are you still there?
Yeah, we're here.
Okay. Um, non-dilutive funding, opportunities was included in your trough. And I can understand that because, you know, there is a accountability. There should be a return on investment. There should be an analysis done that is being done by these organizations giving out funds. And then it very rarely is, extremely rarely. It's just not even nine close. But the idea that you are including it is really good because obviously investors, they want to see the returns on investment. They want to see all the other things, well, return on investment. And so, but when you're talking about non-dilutive funding, you have organizations handing out the money, they sometimes don't know what the return on their investment is. And so it's almost, it begs the question of when you do get these, besides a thank you letter, you need to be accountable for this. And then if it's not included in the trough, it almost then helps you to move yourself positive for some period of time in order to then hire management facilities, you know, things that you would be able to do with a little bit of funding before you have to go back in and ask for more. So what's your thoughts on that, on the non-dilutive stuff?
You can take me backwards to the slide of the uh tough, the tough questions to ask yourself.
Yes, 1 second, I'm gonna put that.
So I think you're absolutely on target, Bob, and that, yes, grant funding is wonderful in so many ways that it almost breeds a lack of accountability at times. And it's why these slides are so important, that the CEO recognizes that if they don't hold the line, nobody, especially around grant funding, nobody else will. And even though it feels good to not have somebody hold that kind of line on us, it's not ultimately very healthy. So I kind of look at it that the CEO's role is to constantly be asking these internal review questions. And if you receive non-diluted capital, you got to put yourself to the same measuring stick that somebody who's going to expect a return will put you on, because there are companies that can forever live in the grant system. Okay, so there are companies that they do purely deep research and they forever live in the grant system. And if you're building one of those kinds of companies, that's great. But the far majority of the peer group is ultimately you're going to be pushed out of the grant system and you're going to have to find commercialization. And so it's in these slides that the sins of the past have to be reckoned with, okay? And so though it's hard on CEOs to put this much discipline around themselves, the CEOs that are emerging through here that recognize they've kind of gotten as much as they can get out of the depths of the trough, the non-dilutive, the support capital that helps you get moving. As you move out and you're having to start showing performance that your product can actually go to market and then there's a market that wants it, the demands for measurement are going to become ever more rigorous. And for the CEO, that means if you can't give it, they'll find somebody else. So it's job security that you actually force yourself through this. And what I say to people, if you can't do it quarterly, if you can't do it semi-annually with your team, do it at least once a year. Force yourself to reckon with right before you close your end of the year books. Force yourself to reckon with where did we get to and where are we going to go in the new year. And if we have deficiencies that we're coming into the end of the year with, what's our corrective plan? Because that's also what keeps your team sharp. I mean, if you want a high functioning team, you're going to put them under rigorous review.
Good, thank you.
Anything else? Great questions, Bob. Thank you.
All right, everyone, have a great day and thanks again for your time. Look forward to seeing you at future events.
Thank you.